All right, this is the PWI Podcast. I'm your host, PWI senior writer Al Castle. Almost forgot my title there. Back with my co-host. Been a little while. Ryan Solomon, how's it going?
It's good to be back, and always good to see you, Al, and Lou as well.
Yes, for the first time in a long time. I had to figure this out. I think it's been close to 10 years. But joining us on our show, longtime PWI contributor Louie Dee. How's it going, Lou?
I'm doing well, guys. Yeah, great to see you. It has been a while.
Not for you two, right? I mean, you guys have actually been on a podcast more recently than you've been on this one.
Yeah, I did an episode of Brian's podcast about WWE experiences with Vince McMahon, and we live like a town apart, so we run into each other here and there too. But yeah, we did the back when the Vince drama started to really unfold. So that was fun to relive some old memories with Brian and Jimmy Noonan and some others.
That's right. Yeah, I did a couple of those. I had a couple of roundtables like that.
For people who don't know, Louie, give a little about your background, and you've got some history working at WWE.
Yeah, I do. I'm a two-time alumni, actually. So I worked there from 2004 to 2008, the first period coinciding with Brian being a magazine writer while I was a library assistant and then a web video PA, then associate editor, senior editor, all kinds of editor titles. Left for about 10 years. Obviously, which is when I joined PWI in like 2008, late 2008-ish. Went back to do WWE Network for the relaunch of Network 2.0 in 2019, obviously before Peacock and all that transition. So I basically spent 2 years watching stuff from the 80s and 90s to make sure metadata was tagged correctly. It was a really horrible job. I hated going to work 45 hours a week.
And they paid you to do it too.
And they paid me to do it. And unfortunately, I was a contractor though. So when COVID hit and all the changes happened, I got furloughed. But all works out in the end. One door closes, another opens, and I'm still with PWI. So I guess this is technically my second stint with PWI because I had to take a couple years off there while working for the E. So.
Yeah, you'd be one of the more senior guys. I've got how many years now? 7 years.
I was gonna say you were there for a good 5 before I was. So
no, if you're saying you came on 2008, I was 2007, so I wasn't that far behind you.
No, you were really. Wow.
Yeah.
For some reason, I thought you were there much longer. But yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, wrestling fans would hear your job is to watch old 80s and 90s wrestling. And I think that is like the job from heaven. What was it that good? Is it the kind of thing that like it just becomes, and I'm sure to some extent just becomes work, and you start to kind of hate watching old wrestling?
No, because we did. I mean, obviously the breadth of stuff that's on the WWE Network. So I would do 20 episodes of Raw, and then get burnt out on Raw after a couple weeks, and I'd switch over to WCW or Mid South or reliving the train wrecks that were Nitro in the late 90s, early 2000s. Some stuff that I never really got to. Mid South is a little before my fandom, but getting to see like DiBiase and Matt Bourne and Duggan and One Man Gang and those guys doing their thing before they came to the WWF in the late 80s was fun. So I always found a way to mix it up. And I mean, realistically, it doesn't matter what you're doing when you're watching TV for a living and it's something you love. I mean, sure, there was crappy episodes of Raw here and there, most of the mid 90s, to be honest, but it was fun. And then, I would do special projects like, hey, Damien Demento is spelled 2 different ways in 71 assets. This is the way it is. Can you go in and fix that? And it's like, it's tedious, wrote kind of anybody could do at work, but it's like, I just changed Damien Demento's name for 1 million people to see. So that's pretty cool.
And Lou, I have to thank you, Lou, for giving me the ability to binge watch Mid-South Wrestling anytime I want. I don't know if my wife would thank you, but I certainly thank you.
Well, you can tell Jamie I apologize.
If you were still there, I'd be getting on your case about where's all the championship wrestling from Florida episodes. But, I don't have
so much, there's so much stuff. And it's going to be interesting to see how this Netflix deal fully shakes out once it starts in January and Raw moves. And the Peacock, I think the Peacock contract is up shortly thereafter too.
Yeah, it's coming.
It's going to be interesting to see if Netflix says, listen, we've got this team of guys. And obviously I don't wish anyone that's still there after all the TKO merger also, kind of got a lot of people laid off. If Netflix has this gigantic group of people that does this, that they have the bandwidth to, pull out championship wrestling from Florida or superstars or challenge or, some of that stuff we logged for the internal databases in 2004 or 5. My original job at WWE 20 plus years ago now was, as part of the media library, was logging that stuff. So I logged like 100 episodes of Challenge in like the era where it was The Undertaker, Kona Crush, Papa Shango, like, that WrestleMania 8, 7, 8, 9 era.
They've done a great job with the superstars, basically like all through the 90s, but not Challenge. There's just a handful of the first run of Challenge, like not even the first year, but superstars got quite a lot.
And they just stopped updating everything, right? I feel like it's been years since anything historic has gone up. Like it's been dropped altogether.
Well, now that they have this WWE Vault channel on YouTube, it almost seems like that's becoming the new destination for where they put this stuff up. I think it's weird when, like they just put an Atlanta Omni card up there, which, I went nuts for it. I watched it immediately. But sometimes they'll do this frustrating thing where they put stuff up on there that's already on Peacock.
Yeah.
Why would you bother doing that? Put the stuff up that we haven't seen. That's the definition of the vault. But, at least it's something.
Yeah, there's entire years of prime time or challenge that just aren't up there. And these days, when I look for that stuff, I'll go on YouTube before I'll go on a Peacock because you're more likely to find it. And my sense is it just stopped being a priority. And you'd have a better sense of this, Louie. Was it just that like not enough people are watching this old stuff to make it worth the effort?
Yeah, it was one of the lower return. Some of that old stuff was some of the lower return stuff. I mean, there's guys like us who, would love in theory to sit around and watch old wrestling all the time. But I mean, I can't tell you how often I watch Peacock. It's twice a month, usually the premium live event. And maybe once in a while on a Saturday afternoon, if my kid's out with my wife and I'm hanging out at home and I'll throw on, I'll be doing something and I'll throw on, an old WrestleMania or something. So it's one of those things that sounds great in theory and it's awesome that it's always there, but the streaming hours, the viewing return wasn't what they wanted it to be. Which, again, is why I wonder with Netflix with a bigger revenue streams, bigger team, this and that may start to do some of the things. To your point about the Vault channel, like, it's on Peacock, but if people don't have Peacock, they can't see it. So you're doing a little bit of the best of both worlds, I guess.
True.
I too watched the Omni card because I was like, damn, that's something. The site of the Omni was one of the places I made a pilgrimage to when I was in Atlanta for Mania, however long, 13 years ago now, I guess. We went to Center Stage Theater to a Ring of Honor show just to go to. I didn't even care about the show. I just wanted to be at Center Stage Theater.
Were you like, whoop, there it is?
I was told who to cheer for and who to boo. And the guy who's going to win the TV title 9 months from now came out for squash. It was just one of those things where I was like, I got it. This is where the same thing. We went to Charlotte for a wedding a month or so ago. And I drove by the old stomping grounds.
Yeah,
So
I'm not the only one that does stuff like that. That's good.
What I just did not long ago is visit the new WWE headquarters. I was going away for the weekend in Connecticut with the family in the Mystic area, and so I hadn't seen the new building. Have either of you guys seen it? It's really nice.
No.
Big giant WWE championship belt, like.
Well, I've seen it from the highway, but I haven't like gone up to it. I mean, every time I'm going up and down 95, I see it, but I haven't walked by it yet.
I've never been in, but I drive by it a lot because I still play softball in Stanford. So I drive by it a lot, but I haven't been inside or whatever. But it's that was a long time coming too. I mean, that was in the works before I went back. So that was, I started there. My second run at WWE started 6 years ago last week. and that was in the works before that. So I mean, that's how long it took once UBS building became available. And
right, that's what that is.
They were using 5 different pieces of real estate in Stamford for operations at one point when I was there, because we always had the TV studio in the towers. We knew it, Brian, but our building for the network was over in Harbor Drive, where like the Yes Network and CBS Sports Network have their digital studios. They had a second building in Hamilton Avenue at that point, and then they were using the building across from the tower as overflow. So there was literally 5 different pieces of real estate. Granted, 4 of them were 2 plots of land next to across the street from each other, but still they had 5 buildings.
And this is the first time that the corporate and the TV production have been in the same location together.
Yep.
Which is a big thing because it's all one giant campus. But I remember when it was right after I guess right after we both left, that they started to overflow to across the street, that the Matt Cali building over there. And I remember one time I had to go back for something years later. And I don't tell me, you probably saw this when you were back there, but there's so much traffic, foot traffic back and forth on East Main Street between the tower and the overflow building, that they actually had a cop just permanently stationed there to make sure that people could safely jaywalk without getting run over.
Vince hired like police security detail to be able to walk people across the street like it was like a college campus or something.
Right.
They should have that here at Sacred Heart, because every time I have to drive to the mall, I got to wait for 700 children to cross the street on a red light. It was crazy. And the tower, the first floor of the tower where we were, looked completely different in 2018. It was more open, and the offices were still the same, but it just like looked completely different now. I'm sure what the inside of the new building looks like is probably great. I mean, I know they spared no expense with architecture design in there. I have a couple of friends actually in the neighborhood that work that still work there. My neighborhood, we have like multiple WWE alumni and or current sort of employees, which is pretty bizarre for a small town of 7,000 people. But one of my neighbors is a technical director for some of the shows, and said their control rooms are just ridiculously like brand new, state of the art, awesome. So all the stuff you're seeing come out of the studio is top notch.
Yeah. What since you were joking about this when we were there, and this might be kind of one of the subjects we get into in a moment, but do you think Vince McMahon is welcome in that building? Do they have his picture on the security desk?
It's like the FBI's most wanted list. Yeah, no, I don't think so. I would guess not.
Yeah, it's got to be a burn, because I imagine that was his dream, his baby, that new headquarters and your sort of persona non grata.
It's kind of like what I imagined was going to happen, which is that the new corporate overlords and all those, the Shapiros and all those guys are just got to a point where they were just like, enough with this guy. Like, what are we getting ourselves into here? Like, you can't drag us down. We're trying to run a business here. But I also imagine in my head, like the sort of comical scenario of, one day Vince just showing up at the front door, and the security guy, is too like nervous and scared to tell him he can't come in. And
what do you mean I can't come in?
Yeah, maybe he knows the guy like by his first name, like, come on, Joe, let me in. You know me. and then he winds up like wandering the halls, and people are like, what's he doing here?
Yeah. Well, sort of timely that you bring that up. We're going to be discussing some of this. One of the things I wanted to talk about, given that the election is now in the rearview mirror, and not that anybody comes here for any kind of political takes. So I think we're going to do this carefully and mindfully, and avoid sort of discussing politics, understanding that we've got listeners and readers from all sides of the political spectrum. But it does strike me that more than any other election, wrestling was kind of all over this election, and right up until Trump's victory speech, when you look at who's up there on the stage, and thought we'd take the opportunity to discuss about what, if any, ramifications this election will have on pro wrestling. So we'll get into that in a bit. Before that, want to get the plugs out of the way. PWI, we have got right now the women's 250 issue is available on the newsstands. The second leg of our trilogy of ranking issues. We just wrapped up the tag team issue. Not sure when that's coming out. I'll say no spoilers. I think it may be the most controversial of the three. Brian, I haven't asked you about the women's 250 Toni Storm number one. We had Patricia Rogers here talking about it in the last episode. Any takes on the selection?
Well, I got to know her very well and interview her for the cover story we did with her, and so I'm a big fan. And we got to collaborate on that interview, which I loved doing so much because it was just so completely insane and in character. So I mean, I love it. I mean, look, I still think she's one of the best things that AEW has going. Rhea Ripley was out there, and I mean, I wasn't a part of the selections or anything, but I'm sure her lack of activity probably hurts her to a certain degree. You can make an argument for her, but I mean, especially on the AEW side, I really, Toni Storm to me is the supreme female talent that they have. I mean, even with Mariah May as the champion, it still feels like Toni Storm just kind of overshadows everything, at least in my very biased opinion. So
yeah. How about you, Louie? Any takes on Toni Storm and generally kind of the women's wrestling scene right now?
So right here, you mentioned Rhea Ripley, and I'm going to put up number 5. I would look for that as a possible WrestleMania 42 match right there, because those two would have a barn burner, I think.
Yeah. Stephanie Vacker, who is fantastic. Yeah, I got to write that up, and she was one of kind of like the real revelations of 2024. And the really interesting story about her was that it was sort of the classic case of winning by losing. She lost that match against Mercedes at Forbidden Door, and in the process looked so good. She really was the story coming out of that match. That WWE comes knocking, signs her away from AEW. She was expected to sign with AEW. I haven't seen that much of her yet. I guess she's still coming up the developmental system.
Few instances in NXT and change the business, because now they have like no competes or however they do it, where if you appear, they lock you down before they have.
We should talk about that too. This WWE.
You don't get a Stephanie Vaquer. She's had a couple matches on NXT. They were sort of doing the whole like new school versus like NXT. I don't know, New Blood versus Millionaires Club kind of angle with Roxanne and Cora Jade and the rest of them. And I mean, you and I were there, obviously, Al, working for PWI when the women's 50 became a thing.
Yeah.
And now it's the women's 250, which tells you just how much AEW has raised the profile, how much Shawn Michaels has raised the profile with NXT. I mean, they have a secondary women's championship. Obviously, we just saw Nick Aldis unveiled the women's United States championship. Right. So, WWE is putting a focus on that, especially in developmental. I mean, they had a 10-woman tag match 2 or 3 weeks ago now in NXT with Stephanie Vaquer, Julia, Jordan Grace was involved. And that was like a third of the women's roster that's on regularly on NXT. It's thriving. And they're all in different stages of their development, but I mean, Toni Storm being number 1, like you said, Rhea Ripley was kind of inactive for a lot of the year. Jordan Grace being in TNA hurts her. I know she was number 2, but they also don't work as much. Toni, that angle with Mariah May was probably one of the better angles of the year overall in terms of just the way it was done. So it's amazing that we have. I obviously didn't have anything to do this year with the 500, the 250, or the tag team rankings for due to my back surgery. But it's the first 2 came out great, and I'm eagerly awaiting the tag team one coming out.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point about kind of the health of women's wrestling. I remember one thing for a long time. One of the complaints was that, and I guess this was largely WWE at the time, since they were kind of the only show in town throughout the 2000s and even into the 2010s. It was like there was the one women's program going on at any given time, and now there are several, not just for championships. Women are all in various storylines. You'll have several women's matches per show. And one of the good things, I think, is that the novelty of stuff like, oh my God, they're going to have their own Money in the Bank match or their own Women's Royal Rumble. That's all kind of worn off now. And it's like, I don't want to say total parity because I don't think they're there yet, but they've come a long way. AEW actually has a little ways to go, despite them having the #1 wrestler. They still haven't had a line to pay-per-view with women, and I certainly think they could have and should have, and maybe Full Gear coming up here is an opportunity in that they don't have the strongest main event in the world with the men, and when that happens, maybe it's an opportunity to do something with the women. So we will see. Anyhow, go to PWI-online.com and pick up this issue. Lots more in here besides just Women's 250. We got the ballot for the PWI year-end awards, some of the contenders for those awards in here, and much more. Go ahead and subscribe. You won't miss an issue. You'll get a deep discount over the cover price. We've got bundles now where you can get the digital edition and the print edition. Both of them, one comes to you faster, and then the other one you get to have the magazine in your hand, which is cool. And I'm very excited about the Tag Team 100. That's also grown. That was the 50 when we started a few years ago. Now this is the 5th year, and I think it's going to create some buzz, in part because we've seen big wrestling companies kind of pull back a little. I mean, I think we had a little bit of a mini renaissance of tag team wrestling for a few years there, and I think a notable drop off in the last year. And so I think because of that, some of the names that you're used to seeing near the top of this list might not be, and some teams that were never ranked or not ranked very high, you're going to see near the top. So stay tuned for that. Again, PWI-online.com, place to go. All right, let's talk a little bit about the election. Again, I mean, such a weird thing, but the reality is wrestling was all over this election, whether it was Hulk Hogan as one of like the major surrogates for Donald Trump, or Trump appearing on The Undertaker's podcast, Linda McMahon, now I guess ostensibly with I don't know if it's a cabinet level position, but she's going to be chamber a Secretary of Commerce, right? She was Secretary of Business first administration, but very much in the inner circle. She was one of the people leading the transition team and was there on stage with like the very inner circle. A little bit on the other side, I mean, one of like the amusing things was that the campaign reignited the rivalry between the Undertaker and Batista, with Dave Batista being like the surrogate for Kamala and Undertaker out there campaigning for Trump. Just wacky. And beyond that, I mean, it's not lost on me that a WWE Hall of Famer was just elected president of the United States for the second time. Yeah, which is just, is this real life? That aside, I mean, there's very much a thought, and you hear the pundits talk about it, that pro wrestling was very much in Trump's strategy of presenting himself. And I mean, he came out to the Undertaker's theme music with a long black coat at one of these rally events. So, for better or for worse, Donald Trump is pro.
He's a showman. He's a showman.
Yeah, and he's got a lot of that. We see the closeness with Dana White. One of his closest confidants, and Dana White, you've seen now kind of in bed with WWE. They're all under the Endeavor banner, and in the Undertaker podcast, he was putting over Ari Emanuel. So anyhow, none of that means that they're going to be passing any laws anytime soon having to do with pro wrestling. But firstly, the one thing that comes to mind as a real tangible thing, and we're talking a little bit about Vince McMahon, but there's been discussions for a while now about whether he might face federal criminal charges over that. I think because of that, this would be a really welcome development by McMahon, in as much as whether it is a pardon, if it ever gets to that, and he hasn't been charged with anything yet, so nothing to be much less convicted, so nothing to be pardoned from. But also, Trump, I would think, would be able to steer investigators, his Department of Justice, away from Vince McMahon. So, Louie, I'll ask you. I mean, is that a realistic thing? Do you think Donald Trump just kind of stays out of it, or in as much as they are friends, and I don't know if you call them that, but certainly
Vince likes to think that they are. Well,
and they've had a relationship for whatever, it's been probably close to 50 years, and some overlap, I would think, or a lot of similarities in as far as some of the accusations that McMahon faces and some of what Trump has faced. Can you see him helping make this go away?
I mean, you never say never, right? We should have learned in his first term and over the last 4 years with everything he's done that you never say never with Donald Trump, because he's liable to do just about anything that's off the beaten path, so to speak. Obviously, again, Linda was the head of the Small Business Administration in his first term. She's probably going to be the Secretary of Commerce here. She's the co-chair of his transition team. So, obviously, Brian laughed. Vince likes to think they're friends. I don't know how many true friends anyone like Vince or Donald Trump or anyone in that stratosphere really has, because, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. So who knows? But, I mean, you never know, especially for all the things that Vince has done and or been accused of, the fact that his wife is a top, a top person in the Trump administration, it looks like. Sure, I could see him doing that. Why not? We're going to pardon Vince. Everything's going to be great. I can see it, right?
I think we also don't know. I'm inclined to agree with you. Most likely, I mean, that's not the way that government or the American justice system should work. But we know that that's not the way they're supposed to work. But we know that all bets are off the table. However the expression goes, all bets are off. And
they control all three.
Right.
The same party controls all three branches of government. So it's
one thing about the Linda factor is what I wanted to say when you were bringing up Linda. Now we don't really know even the nature of their relationship anymore. They've lived apart for years and years.
Yeah.
And for all we know, she may be leading the charge more than anyone else to make sure that he faces federal charges. Who knows? We really don't know. Probably not, but we don't know the nature of their relationship. I also want to point out with the Linda thing that it's an important distinction. I'm not a civics expert, but Secretary of Commerce is a cabinet position. I don't think the small business position she had in 2016 was an official cabinet position. So this is a major step up. She is now a member of the actual presidential cabinet. That's a very big deal.
So this is the weirdest sentence I think I've ever said related to pro wrestling in my entire life. Linda McMahon is in the line of succession for the presidency.
Wow, yes. Is that right?
Yes, they would have to be an independent.
That's the weirdest thing I've ever seen. And I interviewed Donald Trump. I mean, thanks to Vince McMahon, I interviewed 15 and 8, whatever it was, years before he assumed the role, but a sitting president of the United States in 2007.
You interviewed him when he was doing the
when he was just a guy that was, had Bobby Lashley as his avatar to shave Vince's head.
Yeah,
right. Yeah. Wow, I'm impressed that they got you a chance to do that. I remember because I was at that Mania. That was in the one in Detroit, right?
Yeah, Ford Field.
And I was backstage before the show, and then after when the show started, I went to the box, the employee box they had up there. But we were told specifically, and I think this was coming from Trump himself, they were like, if you do not have any business with Mr. Trump or any, to not make any contact and not approach him or speak to him.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking that is not going to be a problem at all. Thank you. And I went dutifully to my luxury box to watch the show. But yeah.
So this is one of those like weird confluences of, again, what kind of friendship do they have? So I had that match as one of my 2 matches to cover for the website during Mania 23. And so I interviewed Vince's barber, for one of those fluff pieces that we do. And then I talked to Vince and, about the whole thing. He's like, did you interview Donald? I said, no, we reached out, whatever. He's like, all right, we'll take care of that. And so that day I was introduced to Donald Trump's team, got 5 minutes with him. to talk about the match, which was unexpected, rather interesting. As you can imagine, even 15, 17, 18 years ago, whatever it was now. So yeah, it was him and Snoop Dogg. Those are my two like bucket list. Like I totally got to hang out with them at WrestleMania celebrities is Trump and Snoop Dogg.
Well,
I don't know what that says about me, but whatever.
I don't know if you could back me up on this if I'm remembering this right, but I seem to very clearly remember with the Trump thing, because that was a big part of the promotion for WrestleMania, obviously, that after the fact, after the show happened, I think that Trump had some type of a what's the word, like a clause or something in the contract or a request or demand that his name and likeness not be used for any further promotion of the show after it actually occurred.
Really?
So like home video, merchandise, or whatever, he didn't want his name on anything, only the lead up to the actual show and the show itself.
Yeah.
Beyond that, he was like, take my name off everything.
It was just called the Battle of the Billionaires, Bobby
Right.
Lashley versus Umaga. Yeah, at that point.
Yes.
That's interesting. What do you make of that? Because one of the things that I have been wondering is how much does he really like wrestling? It was there wasn't anything really revealing to come out of the Undertaker interview, but it was interesting seeing Trump try and kind of get up to speed. And he seemed like he really kind of was in the dark about. He was sort of asking like who are the stars now and that kind of stuff, and he didn't know. And Taker's telling him, well, we've got Roman Reigns and we've got Cody Rhodes, he says Cody's Dusty's son. And Trump's sort of like, oh, interesting. So he doesn't seem, for whatever like kind of proximity he's had to these WWE power brokers over the years, he doesn't seem to follow the product that much. Compared with UFC, where clearly he is more of a fan and follows it, and he goes to the fights, and he also has done some kind of like UFC adjacent podcasts and seems more knowledgeable in talking about. He did obviously Joe Rogan, and he's able to pull out certain fighters and fights. Did you have a sense of Louie that he likes wrestling, watches wrestling?
No, I think it was more. Again, I mean, we go back all the way to WrestleMania 4 and 5. This old shows at Trump Plaza for whatever he did. I think it just goes back to his long time alliance, allegiance, friendship, acquaintanceship, whatever you want to call it, with the McMahons, that, hey, let's do this. I got an idea, Donald. What do you got, Vince? What do you got? Sounds good. Like, I think it was just maybe one of those things, again, when he was the GM of Raw or the owner of Raw or whatever it was for a little while too. I think it was just one of those, let's stay in each other's stratospheres and link up a little bit every now and again. But I don't think he's a hardcore wrestling fan by any stretch of the imagination. I don't even know how much interaction he really had with Bobby Lashley.
I don't think he could even remember in that interview who his wrestler was, because he talked about like having a wrestler. I don't think he even remembered who it was, which is fine. I mean, for him, it was just a gig, whatever.
Bobby Lashley as a Secretary of Defense, if he was going to pick a United States veteran.
I think he's got as much experience as the guy who he actually chose. Brian, I think we've talked about this a number of times, and that is like, do we ever foresee the day that WWE sort of like extends that olive branch and we see Trump on WWE television? He is in their Hall of Fame, and there was a time, before his political career where he was very much welcome and was even embraced because, he was a TV star. The Apprentice was a big deal. My sense is that they've kept each other at an arm's distance for the last 8 years or so. Yeah. But does anything about this election and the strength of his win, and certainly UFC and Dana White's got no problem having him at front row at their shows. Dana White walks in with him, all that. Can you foresee a change in the approach where they think, maybe it's not the worst thing in the world to have the president of the United States as a fan of our product kind of out there?
I just tend to think it's It's weird now, but it's just too much of a polarizing thing.
Yeah.
It's, and I know you're right about the UFC exception, and I don't know if it's just, I think, yes, he won and he got the popular vote, but it was not what you'd call a landslide, to the point where it was still pretty close. In fact, he got less votes than he got in 2020. Not to turn into CNN here, but he did. On the Democratic side, though, they got like much less votes than they got in 2020. People just didn't come out, right? So you still, I think, especially from the Vince point of view, maybe it would change now, but the Vince's way of doing things was always to avoid that kind of stuff, to avoid polarizing half the audience kind of a thing and turning people off. It's weird how it's become that way. And when you think about it, presidents showing up at things now, like I because I live in the New York area, I always think about the 9/11 memorial. They do it every year, and in the early years of it, Bush would go, George W. Bush or Obama and things, and then it stopped. The president stopped going because it became too much of a distraction. Like if Trump showed up, New York's a Democratic state. If Biden showed up, you got a lot of conservative people that aren't going to be happy with that. It's become this whole weird thing. On the wrestling side of it, I mentioned this a while back, but remember how they used to always talk about when they were getting Rusev over as a heel, they would tout his relationship with Vladimir Putin.
Putin's favorite wrestler.
And they would put Putin up on the Titantron, shirtless on the horse and the whole thing, and everybody would boo, boo, boo. I feel like they would not dare to do that now. Not because I think half the audience is like, yay, Putin, but because although maybe they are, but it's more of a hot button political thing now to even touch that they just won't do it. And I think I could be wrong because, like I said, it's all new management now, and they are associated with UFC. But I would tend to think they would want to avoid that, to pissing off, half the fan base or whatever.
It's definitely not the period where it's easy to boo Nikolai Volkov or the Iron Sheik and hate Russia and Iran, right?
Right.
And I mean, Al, you can go back too. I mean, I remember, I don't want to say the nation was a buzz because it's not that big of a deal. But like when the first time they had President Obama break down his March Madness brackets, it's like one of those, hey, these guys are human too. They enjoy, they put their pants on one leg at a time and enjoy the same things we do. And like Brian said, Vince always shied away from that. And it's politics in this country is at an all-time fever pitch, side versus side. So maybe they don't go that route, but like even back then you had to be like, why isn't President Obama doing so? Why is he filling out brackets? Well, because he's also human.
And I think that goes, and I think that goes a long way. And when you see people dissect the election over the last week, that is one of the things that has been touched on, was that Trump going out there and doing Rogan and doing the Undertaker's podcast humanized him, and you saw him as kind of a regular guy, and where Kamala Harris less so. And I've always thought that about, I remember to this day watching an episode of Roger Ebert's old show, and I think it was 2 episodes where he had Bill Clinton on when Clinton was still the sitting president, and they did nothing but talk about movies. And Clinton went so deep. I mean, he wasn't just a casual movie guy. This guy knew his film studies and directors and all that stuff, and it was impressive. And you saw him in a different light. Or whether it's Obama filling out brackets, or George Bush talking about baseball. This stuff I think works. It's always resonated when you have you see them as a regular person. So even though I don't know that it's necessarily in WWE's interest, I could see Trump wanting back on WWE television somehow, because so much of his winning strategy was that, the manosphere, as they talk about it, the Joe Rogans of the world, and to some extent I think pro wrestling got lumped in there. Now it's worth noting, I mean, I know UFC fans that are turned off by how much Trump is embraced. by Dana White, and you're watching a fight card, and Trump walks in and gets the standing ovation, and it turns people off. So it absolutely is polarizing. But for the candidate, or in this case, the president elect, I think I could see him wanting to do it because it softens them, right? I mean, it's like, oh, he's just a regular guy. Look at him having fun on Monday Night Raw, whatever, hitting somebody with a steel chair.
Look at him crushing a beer in the audience at UFC, like one of us, right?
Right. Yeah. So
you mentioned Clinton too, like him playing the saxophone on Arsenio Hall, like when we were kids, right? Like, I just looked it up, by the way. Linda would be 10th in line for the presidency. That's where the Secretary of Commerce falls. So.
Okay. All right.
So there you go. So we just gotta hope that the vice president, the Speaker of the House, the president pro tempore of the Senate, and 6 other cabinet members are compromised, and Linda McMahon will be the president of the United States.
Is there anything else, whether something more substantive as far as like, I don't know, like regulatory or anything else, a way that a Trump presidency can impact pro wrestling? We've seen,
yes, actually, and it involves Linda, I think.
Okay.
And so this is interesting. Something I was thinking about. Brian knows it, and we're not going to go into this on the show, but Brian knows that I'm involved locally in our area in government stuff. So I talk to a lot of different people on a regular basis. WWE merchandise. If Trump installs tariffs on imported goods, or however that situation works out, UFC merchandise, WWE merchandise, things like that, anything that comes from overseas, costs may rise. So your Roman Reigns t-shirt may be $5 more expensive. Mm-hmm. That's one of the interesting things I thought about when I saw that he was going to install Linda as a Secretary of Commerce, because, their job is basically promoting American business and industry. So, if and where WWE's merchandise is made, where those title belts are made, where, all that stuff is, that could be an interesting side caveat of prices go up because of some of his policies. So, and as we know, not even political, just, money in the country, entertainment dollars, or people have to be wise with where they spend their money. So, does that mean if there's increased prices on merch, that the merch percentage of what Endeavor makes goes down, or various things like that? That could be an interesting kind of sidebar to it.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's clear is that and I think he said as much. This is going to be a pro-business administration, and you've got Trump and Elon Musk, yucking it up about firing workers who try to unionize. I don't know that bodes that well for some folks and working in pro wrestling. The other thing, I don't know how much this has to do with it, but it was one of my concerns about the Endeavor merger is ticket prices. And I don't know if you guys have been monitoring WrestleMania ticket prices, but forget it. You just can't go. And it's what has happened with UFC for years. They've completely priced out families with kids. The entry level of price to get into WrestleMania now is $700, $800 a ticket, something like that. So good luck on any kind of like checks. Again.
Well, just look at Al, we all live in the New York area. Look at the World Series and look what the prices were for the games at Yankee Stadium. I mean,
WrestleMania is more. I compared them, and it's completely out of hand. UFC's been doing it for years. You can't go to a UFC show for less than $500, and you're seeing. I mean, granted, it's Vegas. Maybe that has an impact on it, but WWE prices have absolutely gone up, and I don't know if this administration is going to make a difference one way or the other. But again, we know that they're going to be pro business. Hulk Hogan, Brian, another name that again I feel like has has lost so much in the last few years. And again, one of sort of like the unexpected stories of this election has been the comeback of Hulkamania, and among a certain population. Hulk Hogan just hasn't been very relevant in wrestling for a long time. He was in Philadelphia for WrestleMania 40, this brand that he built, and they never even put him on TV. And yet now he is all over the place. Does this bode well for Hogan kind of returning to some relevancy in pop culture and in wrestling? I mean, for maybe some of the same reasons where WWE has stayed away from featuring Donald Trump.
Yeah,
they've also stayed away from Hulk Hogan for a number of years. Do they kind of welcome him back into the fold now?
They stayed away from him because obviously they didn't want that uncomfortable situation where he comes out and gets booed out of the building, which would be really awkward and unfortunate. It happened at a WrestleMania. Mm-hmm. And that's why I remember at the Royal Rumble, actually, he did this incredible pre-tape that they had with him where he was talking about, the importance of the Rumble and how you win it and all this kind of thing and giving advice to everybody. It was great. But you know why they did it? Because they can't have him do that live because he'll get killed. So they do it as a pre-tape thing. And so they could run it. I think what happened with Hogan is he found his people. I think that's what it is. Like, he did what he did and he got, ostracized for it. He said some horrible things and all this kind of thing. And I think what happened with him, if you noticed, like he did sort of this half-hearted apology where he never really, it was more like, it was like the classic, like, I'm sorry if I offended you, right? Apology. Like, not really, I'm sorry for what I did. And so I think he was feeling very frustrated that he couldn't, I know I'm like, psychoanalyzing Hulk Hogan, but I watch these things very closely. I think he was feeling very frustrated that he couldn't quite get back in, that he couldn't quite get that acceptance again. There are even many talent, African American and otherwise, who have openly, even under WWE contract, said negative things about him on social media. Bianca Belair comes to mind. There have been others, and it's like I think he finally said, "Screw it. I'm no longer trying to court this fan base anymore that is done with me. I have these people over here who never gave a damn to begin with about the things that I said or did, or quite frankly, many of them probably never even had a problem with it. And I'm going to get in front of them and they're going to love me because I'm not going on any kind of a limb here to say, as many people have pointed out over the years, that Hulk Hogan's ego is big and also at the same time fragile, like many big wrestling stars. And so this is like a dream come true for him. He can come out at Madison Square Garden, brother, right, the place that he sold out, 800 times and put 120,000 people in every month, as he'd probably tell you. And he could come out and get a roaring ovation, tear his shirt off, people chanting his name. That's catnip for somebody like Hulk Hogan.
And he got his mojo back, right? Because when we've seen Hogan over the years in the kind of modern WWE structure where everything is scripted for you, he hasn't really felt comfortable. But seeing him up on stage at the Garden, just cutting kind of an old school Hulkamania promo, I hadn't seen that level of comfort and sort of confidence from Hogan in a long time.
Yeah, that's what it felt like. It was like coming home and finding the fans and the people that, it's basically like a condensation of all the people who were willing to forgive him or who weren't that bothered by it to begin with. They're all sort of on that side of the political spectrum. So he went there,
Yeah.
It's one of those, for some people, don't meet your enemy or don't meet your heroes because they'll disappoint you. I guess to Brian's point there, but that's his niche now. Cool. Him and Kid Rock and various other people who, people of our generation loved as kids or teens or young adults that may not love now because, again, the political spectrum has divided our country possibly irreparably in some ways. That those are now that's where their safe zone is. Those are their people, as Brian said.
And the thing I want to say about Hogan too, I know Al probably wants to move on, but I have one thing that I feel very conflicted about is I've always been somebody who I have always felt, as with many celebrities and who get into this hot water and things happen and things are said or done, there's always a way back if it's deserved and if it's earned. And I've always felt with Hogan that there was that window, there was that opportunity to win back the trust of fans if you were earnest about it, if you did it the right way, because he is look, I'm a wrestling history person. He is one of, if not the most significant wrestlers who's ever lived. Like, he's crucially important to the history of wrestling. You know, he's not somebody you just want to kind of dance around and cut out of the fabric of wrestling history. So there was this way of him to sort of build things back. And I think that's done now. Like any kind of shred of goodwill from the people who actually were hoping for him to make up for the past, that's gone now. They're just like, yeah, that's who he always was. He just gave up on trying to win us back. And I think that goodwill is gone. And but he's got, in place of that, like I said, the support of all these other people who don't really.
He's got a new following, yeah.
Right.
One thing I do think it's and I didn't anticipate talking about Hogan this much, but I do think that so much of what we have seen as sort of like the antipathy toward Hogan over the last, whatever it's been, 10 years, it is less about anything that he said or did, and more just about sort of, I think, a generational change that there are now, you've got to be our age or older, right, to even remember, Hulk Hogan being a thing. It's I remember going.
And so there's less nostalgia and tolerance for it, because you have
but
all these young,
60-year-old Republicans who
right.
Yeah.
You have these young fans going like, who cares about this old racist guy? Like, they don't have that connection. Like, where someone like me going, yeah, but he's Hulk Hogan. Like, can't we work this out? You know what I mean?
It'll be like people who are a little bit older than our kids thinking in 20 years that about John Cena, right? Like, I
think you're seeing some of it with John Cena already. Yeah. I think there might be some disappointment about how much interest there is in the John Cena retirement tour. People get older, and nostalgia is a funny thing, and sometimes it takes some time. Cena's in that weird sort of period where it's sort of like too recent to be nostalgic over, but too old to sort of like really appreciate. So he's kind of in the middle. But this happens, and there's some way where this is also kind of relevant to the Harris campaign, in that, watching some of these events, and she would bring out, what she thought were like big guns in terms of like celebrity endorsements was Oprah Winfrey and Julia Roberts. And I'm like, what year is it?
But Taylor Swift.
Yeah. And Megan Thee Stallion.
That's huge. I couldn't name a song of hers if you held me at gunpoint, but she's the hugest thing in the world. And Megan Thee Stallion too is like a massive current star. So
and Beyonce too. She did a lot with Beyonce. I mean, Beyonce is
even Beyonce. I mean, Beyonce, like, she's got a different status now where she's sort of like royalty. But in terms of like, I've got teenage kids. More of them are listening to Beyonce.
Well, the funny thing is about the wrestling angle is, because people were saying how much wrestling was present on the Republican side. And then you had people on social media going like, the Democrats need to do the same thing. They need to, at the DNC convention, they need to bring out CM Punk and Jim Cornette. And I was like, listen, guys, we need less of this in public, not more of it. We need less of this. But maybe they were right. I don't know. Maybe can you imagine Jim Cornette coming out at the DNC and ripping Donald Trump to pieces in like a profanity-laced tirade? I don't know. Maybe that would have worked. What the hell do I know?
I would have watched it just for entertainment value, but I mean, who knows?
But Batista, in a weird way, did become kind of a valuable surrogate, in that so much of sort of the messaging from the right was that no like real man, no like masculine alpha guy is going to get behind a Kamala Harris. And that's where they leaned on Batista, and he came out there and
here comes Drax the Destroyer telling you.
So I do think he played an important role. I mean, it wasn't enough, but I wasn't anticipating that. But I thought like, there's somebody from the wrestling space kind of trying to counter some of this messaging, and I thought, once upon a time it might have been The Rock, but The Rock knew to stay away this time.
My 7-year-old son is just still amazed every time. Daddy, Drax? Buddy, yes. Like,
yeah.
Daddy, do you know John Cena? Because he knows, like, my son knows like 4 wrestlers by name, and 3 of them are Batista, John Cena, and The Rock. So,
Movie
it's
stars.
like, yeah, exactly. Because he's a huge superhero guy. So we haven't let him watch the movies yet in full because he's a little young. Guardians of the Galaxy, we let him watch.
Yeah.
Because that's his favorite. But like, he's like, just Daddy, you know Drax. And he knows John Cena from like YouTube videos or The Rock from things like that too. The Tooth Fairy and Moana and stuff like that. So
mine are the age that we went to see Terrifier 2 together.
Wow.
So they grow up.
Yeah, we haven't told Tej that Deadpool and Wolverine is now streaming on Disney Plus because he's going to want to watch that, and that's not appropriate for a 7.5-year-old by any stretch of the imagination.
I'm 50, and I don't know if that was appropriate for me.
That's true. Yeah.
Anyhow, I think it was an interesting conversation about in as much as there's an intersection between wrestling and politics, and maybe it never, gets that this much again, but it is fascinating how much the two worlds overlapped in this campaign. Talking about a couple other current events, something I wasn't anticipating bringing up, but I was reminded of it by one of you. This new WWE developmental system, the ID program, where they are. An interesting take, but essentially they're like, well, I don't know what you'd compare it to, but they're signing developmental deals with wrestlers that kind of just hold on to them before they even come over to their developments. You continue working in the independents, but basically we've got rights on you if we want them. And on in some ways for young independent wrestlers, I would think this is great to know that you've got this pipeline to WWE while you continue kind of hustling in the indies. People point out a potential downside if WWE just starts kind of grabbing up a talent that they don't even really intend to use just to keep them away from an AEW or anybody else. Brian, I'll start with you. Any thoughts on this in terms of a strategy?
Well, I've been hearing rumblings about this for actually a pretty long time. And I think one of the reasons, even from talking to even some indie talents who were saying that they had heard talk about this from people like Gabe Sapolsky and ideas being floated. And I think one of the thought processes behind it is you first saw the Next in Line program, which is where they're getting all the college athletes and things to come in, people that are going to be the stars of tomorrow. But I think then on the other side of it, because remember, you have people like Triple H and Shawn Michaels, like these are people that they really get the business and how it works. They've been in the ring. There's this feeling like, we need something to counterbalance this. We're going to have all the college, football players and wrestlers and gymnasts and things, but to counterbalance that, we're going to need some of these seasoned people who know how to work, even if we have to retrain them a little bit, to balance those guys out. Maybe in some cases to put them over and make them look good. Like we can't just ditch the indies, which seemed to be the philosophy a few years ago when NXT got imploded. Now they're going back on that, and I think that makes sense and saying we need a balance. We need like a little bit of both, and that's what this really is. And I know, I get criticized sometimes for being super pro WWE on things, and I do acknowledge that, there is the sense that company has in the past been has been kind of parasitic on the industry. There's no denying that, and there's no denying that side of it. It's sort of like gets their claws into the indie circuit to a certain degree. I think some of it is very realistically to keep people from signing with AEW to a certain degree, because you can lock them up and then you don't have to worry about them going there. But I think what you'll see though is a lot of the biggest praise of it, and this speaks volumes online, is from indie wrestlers, especially ones that, there's different kinds of indie wrestlers. If you are happy to just remain on the indie circuit and that's your thing and that's your life and that's what you enjoy and that's your passion, it's not for you. But there are many, many, many indie workers who see that, it can also be a stepping stone, especially if you want to make a very, very good living doing it. There's a tiny percentage of indie talent who can do that, very tiny, who don't have a day job and things like that. So WWE, love them or not, is the apex of the industry. It's, as they always called it, the show or the big show before Paul White monopolized that name. That's what it was called. That's where, if you were very, very serious about doing all you could do in the business, whether you liked it or not, that's where you knew you needed to be. And this is a perfect conveyor belt to get people there. And so there are many people in independent wrestling who are celebrating it. And I just think it's the natural progression of the business. And I think for WWE's business model, it's the right thing to do, to have a roster of talent who, you know, you don't just want a roster of college athletes. I mean, that's going to be a disaster. Like, they need something like this. So I think it's a good thing overall.
I think maybe the next step in, and if I'm correct, if I remember correctly, the term was global localization that Triple H used a long time ago, when the idea was to build several different NXTs around the world, and UK was going to become Europe, and they were going to try to do something in Mexico or South America and Japan and etc. And that's not necessarily as cost effective or fruitful now that they have, you know, the TKO merger. But, you know, it's very often that I get to liken wrestling to my day job, right? Where, think about baseball and how you go down to see go down to Brooklyn and see a Cyclones game, right? And it's the Mets, you know, affiliate. And there's guys there that are like, this guy could be a Cy Young Award winner in 5 or 6 years. And then there's like the guy you went to high school with who could throw 92, but has 2 pitches and somehow was lucky enough to get drafted in the 30th round. And he's cheap labor, so he's filling a roster spot on that team, right? Just like any other baseball, you know, minor league sport. This the same way. I mean, you have, you know, these guys coming in where these guys are going to go work on Reality of Wrestling, or, you know, some of the ones, obviously all of the ones that they've put in the first batch of WWE affiliates or whatever are all kind of, you know, it's Booker T, it's Rikishi, it's, you know, all those guys. But, you know, you go to an indie show now and same thing. You see guys who, you know, we have Northeast Wrestling right here in my backyard, at the Bethany Town Hall, like all the time. And, you know, there's guys on there. I mean, Carmelo Hayes, I saw him wrestle at Bethany Town Hall in front of 100 people 5 years ago. And, you know, he main evented the biggest NXT show of the year. And there's guys that have been wrestling for that outfit for 20 years because it's their side gig and this is what they do. And they just always dreamed of being a pro wrestler, and they're never going to make it to the show, or even AEW or TNA or Ring of Honor when it existed. And they just do it for the hell of it. So having these guys kind of there as your prospects amidst the whatever else is booking, I mean, I doubt they have any control over how they're being booked or presented, or, you know, there's probably no creative control there, but just the fact that, you know, okay, this guy's going to a Game Changer wrestling show. So a couple of WWE scouts may go down there and say, hey, let's go take a look at Wrestler X and see how he's doing. And all of a sudden this other guy has an amazing match. And they're like, hey, look at this dude. Like, maybe we missed this guy. And it helps, you know, the general idea that you go to scout one player and you see someone who surprises you, and you never know where it can happen. So, you know, there's only so much time on TV. There's only so many spots, even on NXT cards.
Right.
That to have these guys be able to go and do that kind of stuff is really, I think, what the general idea was of that whole NXT worldwide sort of idea. Only now it's much more cost effective, much less stress on them to have to do it. And they just send, you know, Wrestler X out here to this indie show to see how he's doing. And, you know, it's probably a good thing for everybody.
Well, that's the other side of it too. This ID program, the reverse of it, works really well because, like many people have said, NXT is not really a developmental anymore. I mean, it hasn't been for a while. They're on cable TV. They're on national TV. They have expectations of.
They're on broadcast TV now.
Right, broadcast. Right, they have to deliver ratings.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the benefits of developmental is that people can work in a low stress environment where they don't have every eye on them, right? They need that. I mean, yes, they need to be in front of crowds, but maybe not in front of millions of people watching on TV. It would be, imagine if like OVW was on national television, right? It wasn't. So now there's a need to have something that's like below NXT. And I think it's good. What I mean by the reverse is you can now, and I think they're going to be doing this, you can, I think Lou was hinting at this too, you could start sending some of those NXT people to these places to work and get more experience. So you're not just wrestling at the performance center, and that's your entire seasoning in the business, because people have complained about that NXT is too cookie cutter, that it's producing these in-house people that have never worked anywhere else. They only know one thing, and they haven't been seasoned, and they haven't been out there in the real world, or paid their dues, however you want to put it. And this is a way to do that. You can send people to these indies and get them around different people and different things, and get them more. I know there's the other side of it, which was prevailing for the longest time, which is like, no, we don't want them to know anything else but WWE. But I think that they might be seeing the error of that now.
Sure, and I think AEW's got everything to do with that, right? Because AEW, they do have more of a developmental system that relies on the independents, and they are just picking up guys who are building reputations, guys and women who are building reputations on the independent scene, and then putting them on TV. Bringing what they learn from the independents to a television product. And I think WWE potentially has realized that they've missed the boat on a lot of potential stars, because they weren't that kind of entrenched in the independents, and for a long time kind of scorned them, right? I mean, as you touched on, it was this idea that like, they don't know how to do it. We know the way to do it. And it's relatively few independent or standout independent wrestlers that were making their way to WWE developmental, right? I mean, the ones that did, you would be like, this is going back a ways, but the path used to be sort of like you'd work through the independents, really build a name for yourself, then end up like on a Ring of Honor or something like that, which is sort of a level above the independents, and then be headlining as the top act in Ring of Honor as world champion, and from there move to WWE developmental. So it was a really long road to get to WWE, but not necessarily for the non-wrestler, for the gymnast, for the college star, for what have you. So they really were, as much as they were the premier wrestling and are the premier wrestling company in the world, in some ways they have less of a direct pipeline from the independents than every other wrestling promotion, and it really seemed sort of like counterintuitive. So this makes a lot of sense, and I do wonder, are there negative side effects of this? I mean, I think about the wrestler who is, and there's a guy from my local indie creative pro who got one of these deals, and I wonder, like, what that does to him, to his reputation. It's sort of like all eyes are on you. It's sort of a different level of scrutiny now by fans and by your fellow wrestlers. Like, oh, you're the WWE pick. So inevitably, some of these guys are not going to work out, right? And could it set you further back to have been on a WWE ID deal and then not have been picked up? Then I guess there's all kinds of different ways where this could manifest. But I absolutely think that it is a smart move on WWE's part, and something that does suggest kind of a departure from the Vince McMahon way of doing things.
Yes,
where they really kind of scorned the word wrestling, much less kind of any kind of affiliations with independent wrestling.
The weird thing, though, I agree with you, but let's also not forget that it's almost like things are coming full circle, because if you go back before NXT, before even the developmental official feeders and things, like in the 90s, even Vince himself recognized, like, there's no more territories. There's no more way to bring in people that are already big stars and seasoned and ready to go from day one. And so then they did start forming relationships with ECW, the USWA in Memphis, Smoky Mountain Wrestling. They were actually the closest thing to what this is. And it's almost like they went back to that, but now it's like a new idea because it hasn't been done in 30 years, because they understand now that you need that. You kind of need that. You can't just produce wrestlers on a conveyor belt like that, like in a factory. The business just doesn't work that way.
And I think there might be a realization that some of these college athletes and stuff, and I think any of us could have told you this, that's not necessarily the same skill set.
Well,
who's the guy? Gable Stevenson, right?
Yes.
You know,
Stevenson, Gable Stevenson.
Yeah, Stevenson. I mean, all due respect, a flop, right? I mean, it didn't work, right?
No, didn't work. Well,
and his brother was better than he was, and both of them are gone now. So
I've had conversations, and this is how I was saying how I was hearing rumblings about this with people who had been in some of these camps and things, and before the system was officially set up, and they were being told in no uncertain terms that, look, we're going to be getting all these college athletes coming in who are going to look great, and we're going to have all these athletic abilities. They're not going to know how to work, and really being bluntly told, like, here's the truth, guys. Like, a lot of those college men and women, like, they're going to be main eventing WrestleMania. They're going to be the big stars, and we need people like you who actually know what they're doing to get them ready. You know what I mean? To be the ones that work with them. They may wind up being the bigger stars than you or whatever, but we need people like you to get them ready and to make them look good. And I think that's also a part of this too, is to shine up these next in line kids.
And some have really worked out. I mean, you look at like what's her name, Tiffany Stratton,
Tiffany Stratton,
yeah. I mean,
major success story of that. Yes.
Or Obafemi too, isn't he? Isn't he one of those? So
yes, I think he was.
There's a business side to this too, Alan. You mentioned Create a Pro, which anyone who knows anything about that, we know who's behind it, and it's a couple of guys that have been affiliated with WWE forever, and Create a Pro will live on forever thanks to Brian and Pat. But you also look at some of these places, like one of the ID talents is a guy from IWC in Pittsburgh. So we're going to look at this guy, and he's going to do all this, and then all of a sudden, let's say, one of these guys like Sean Spears or one of these bigger NXT talents kind of shows up at IWC and pops a little bit of a gate, maybe because, hey, it's a WWE superstar coming to town, and it puts a little coin in that guy's pocket too. There's a business side to it where it's helping, you loan out. I mean, you loan out a low-level WWE star for a show as part of the, hey, we're going to come out and watch our guy that we're at the ID program. We'll give you, even if it's like Otis. You know what I mean? Like,
sure.
You loan out one of those guys. It's like, I mean, Northeast.
Have they said they're doing that?
What's that?
Have they said they're doing that?
They haven't said they're doing that, but it's a thing that could also be possible where we're going to send one of our good hands to go work with this guy in front of that crowd because it's.
And that's what would happen. Smoky Mountain would bring in Shawn Michaels, and the Undertaker would go to Memphis. I mean, that was
men on a mission, and all those guys that were in like the lower to mid card that weren't doing much of anything would go to the USWA or to wherever. And Northeast Wrestling has made a killing off doing that in the past for bringing in a couple of big stars to do whatever, and people come for that and stay and see a great wrestling show. So. It helps the business, I think, in just about every aspect other than if you're a competitor, honestly.
Right. And that's, it's another way, and maybe they didn't want it this way, but I've always thought that the rise of AEW was going to be great for WWE, that it pushes them out of their comfort zone, do things that they normally wouldn't have, when you're the only game in town, and this was WWE for the better part of, from WCW shutting down to AEW, with TNA as kind of a player somewhere in between, but they could do whatever they wanted, and what was anybody else going to do about it? And now, I don't think we have a WWE ID system without AEW in the mix. So
competition is always better for any business.
Absolutely,
monopoly is just not great for any business. And kudos to Hunter and the Sean and everyone else behind this too, because again, like I know Brian mentioned that Vince did this back in the day with various other things in a sort of down time for the business, but I don't think the Vince of 2023 2024 would be true. The fact that there's a partnership with TNA was a 4-letter word for God knows how long, as was everyone else. So
total nonstop action.
I mean, technically it is, I guess, but you forgot the NWA,
right?
It's good for everyone. I think that all of this is coming about.
Yeah, exciting stuff. All right, guys, thank you so much. Brian, I know you've had a lot going on with the Gorilla Book, and it's now really moving fast. So you're doing some events, right? Virtual events, it's starting to.
Yeah, so the book is sort of like in this in-between phase where the writing part of it is done, and I'm just waiting for the next steps It's in the hands of ECW Press. Bret Hart is going to be, I'm knocking wood, Bret Hart is delivering me the forward to the book in a few weeks. It's all coming together. I'm doing I don't know when this is going to run, but I'm doing a Facebook Live on Tuesday, November 19th to just kind of like talk to people about the progress of the book, because I used to do those, and then I got so busy with the book, I just had to stop. So I'm doing that on the 19th to update people on the book. But another thing, because the book front is a little bit quiet, but I wanted to say on my own podcast, it's being revealed today because the new episode is dropping. But my podcast, Shut Up and Wrestle, I've got the 150th episode coming up next month, and my special guest is Dave Meltzer, who the interview is in the can, and it was a really, really fascinating and atypical conversation with Dave. I think people will find it very refreshing. We stay away from a lot of the toxic internet wrestling culture nonsense and just talk about like the nostalgic wrestling fandom that we love. And it was a really enjoyable conversation. I look forward to sharing with people. It's not going to be out till the week before Christmas, but it's the 150th episode is looming.
Cool. Did you get your Hall of Fame ballot in time? I only realized I had it in my inbox the night before it was due.
Oh man, I have to resist the urge not to just immediately send it back like that day, because I have so many strong ideas about it. But I always want to like leave myself open to persuasion by other people.
Yeah, you take it very seriously.
Well, I used to send it back immediately, and people were like, "Don't do that. You got to hear people out. Maybe there's people you're not familiar with." And I started doing that, but I sent it in like a week before, and I guess also by the time this comes out, I mean, unless the turnaround is miraculous, the Hall of Famers will be announced. It's supposed to be in this week's edition of the Observer, and I think there's something like 10 of them, 12 of them. Like,
I know he said that there's somebody who's been eligible for a long time and never even got that many votes that got in this year. So something of a surprise. I don't know who that might be, but yeah,
exciting.
Yeah. Lou, anything you want to talk about, promote? Kevin keeping you busy at all with any assignments for PWI?
No, I've taken a little bit of time off from PWI due to some other things going on. I had back surgery about 3 months ago. That finally was necessary. So I've been recovering on that, but I'm still in the stratosphere, still helping out a little bit with rankings, providing some expertise on NXT. So I'm pretty comfortable behind the scenes. You guys do a great job with the podcast, and Kevin has done amazing things since taking over for Stu with the amount of you look at the masthead of the magazine and it's a paragraph of contributors now, as opposed to, the three of us and Harry and Mike Pessler. So I'm happy being in the background and just doing my thing. I'm hoping Brian's going to send me an advanced copy of the book as a solid for 20 years of friendship.
Sure.
But, you guys are doing a great job. PWI is in a great place. I love reading it when it comes to my door every month. And yes, I still wait for the hard copy. I don't take advantage of the digital. I still like the hard copy. I have a whole shelf of them here. The most recent episode from issue from every month. So I'm here. I'm working my day job, working my night job as a dad of a 7-year-old kid who does a lot of stuff. I know both of you know all about that on multiple occasions.
Yeah.
And, happy to be around and happy to come do stuff like this whenever you guys want to tap into my brain. It's and
we're happy to have you on the magazine and here on the podcast, and we'll do it again soon. Thank you so much, guys. Appreciate it. Fans, go over to pwi-online.com, pick up the latest issue, subscribe, do all that good stuff, and we will see you again soon.